John Matthews has been a Rotarian since '88. The entire time, I think, at the Club of Mercer Island, right?
No, first club in Coronado, California.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, he's now with the Mercer Island Club. He was district governor for this district back in 2010-11, and he's currently a Rotary International director for the zones, our zone, which is it 20? Ours is 25, right?
We're 25.
Yeah, thank you. For 25 and 26, and he's a VP for Rotary International. John has had a couple of different careers before this, and he spent quite a few years in the Navy, 20 years in the Navy, graduated from the Navy. Yeah, they kicked him out, whatever, but he spent some time in a small local business by the name of Costco, and had a number of senior roles at Costco. He retired from there and is now, he and Mary Ellen are, well, he was telling me the story, he does all sorts of fun things like sit on floats in the Rose Bowl parade and things like that. But I'm thrilled to have John here this morning to give us a perspective on the big Rotary, as well as any other tidbits of wisdom he'd like to share. One thing I will tell you, I don't think John's going to touch on it today. I'd love to find a video of it. He has the best explanation of the Rotary Foundation and 3 buckets in Rotary Foundation that I've ever heard. And if you ever have a video of that or something like that, I'd love to be able to show that next month. But don't bother getting into it today. John?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I wanted to, when we talked a little bit about this, the idea was that I try to stay away from speeches. I think Rotary does a few too many. And just more of a Q&A. I'll kick it off with some comments and thoughts and a broad perspective, and then kind of open it up for you to do it. There actually is a YouTube video, and if you simply Google YouTube, John Matthews 3 buckets, it's sitting right there. It's 8 years old. The date is wrong, you know, that's in there, but that's the gist of it. So that was my claim to fame on that one. Well, it's a delight to be with you. It's always fun, you know, to get into Rotary clubs, to listen to what you're doing, to hear the projects that you're working on in the community, and I think about the work that Rotary does, and it always comes back down to a very simple idea, and that is that every single wonderful thing that Rotary's ever done started with one person who had an idea, developed that idea to change the world. Polio started that way. All the water projects have started that way. All of the good work we've done in literacy and disease prevention have all gone that way. They started with an idea from somebody in one of our 35,000 Rotary clubs. And that's really cool. For me, I get busy. Somebody asked me the other day, and I commented that I'm probably putting in more hours now with Rotary than I did with Costco, and that's a lot. It's full time, and pay's not that great either. So, but you know, the reward is amazing, and for me to have the opportunity to meet with clubs like yours and to move around the world and to see what's happening in different parts of the world is a privilege. And I feel very honored to have the opportunity to serve as a director, and it's been it's been a fun ride so far, and I certainly expect this year to be equally fun. Some of you may be wondering where directors come from, and you know, we have. If you just kind of back up a little bit and think about how Rotary is structured, you are members of this club. You're technically not members of Rotary. Rotary is an association of Rotary clubs. And so the way it's built, the way the organization is built, is as an association of Rotary clubs. And so it's 35,000 Rotary clubs are all in, and that becomes the essence of Rotary. and then your membership ties to this club. This club is granted a charter to be in place, and you agree to abide by certain rules and operate in certain ways, and that keeps you in that association. When we get, it's kind of hard to administer all of that, and so what they do, and did a number of years ago, is to set up districts. And so for every 3,000 to 5,000 Rotarians, they cluster those clubs together and call it a district. On the west coast of the United States, we have it fairly simple. And we all speak, with the exception of a few Canadians that are in the mix. Most of us speak one language, and culture is fairly similar up and down the coast. Not so in other parts of the world. So when you get into my counterpart in Africa has all the countries of Africa are one zone, many districts, but one. So there's after we get districts, there's 500 districts, and out of what they try to do is figure out, well, how do you figure out who gets to serve on the board of directors? And so what they do is, for every 60 to 80,000 Rotarians, you get a seat on the board. So there's 17 seats on the board. They just divide up the 1.2 million wherever they are. One of the cool things that Rotary did a long time ago was they made a promise or a commitment to Rotarians that said, we're going to look at that and reevaluate that every 6 to 8 years. And if population shifts, we're going to give that representation to where that population is moving to. And we just finished going through that. That's called a rezoning. So let's back it up to the West Coast here. So here we are in the Northwest. We are a Rotary Club within District 5030, and 5030 has about 45 clubs, 46 or so in there, and we have about 2,500 Rotarians, and within this group of Rotary clubs, we have a district governor, and Alex served as it last year, and I had the privilege of serving a few years back. And it's one of the best jobs in Rotary. Being club president is one of the best jobs in Rotary. You just, it's just a fun experience. And then for me, I enjoyed serving as governor. And after you've served as governor, you have a chance to do other things. And Rotary has clustered those 60,000, 80,000 Rotarians to have a director into areas across the globe. So in our West Coast, I go from Canada down to Mexico, Hawaii over to New Mexico, and in there's 1,300 Rotary clubs, about 60,000 Rotarians, and that's operationally, that's where I come from. That's a group that selects me. After I served as governor, I had the opportunity to say, well, are you interested in serving as a director? And if you are, you put your application forward, you go before a review board, and then if selected, then have the opportunity to serve as a director. And San Francisco north to Canada is Zone 25, San Francisco south to Mexico is Zone 26. And the way we operate this is, I have both zones. And those, some of those, each about 30,000, equals enough to get a seat on the board. And a few years back, I was selected to represent Zone 25. And when I do that, I represent the entire West Coast. When I started this last year, as soon as I stepped into office, my relief was selected from Zone 26. So we alternate. Zone 26 picks, then Zone 25 picks, and then we keep doing that back and forth. And each of us represents both zones. So when you sit on the board, you have 17 people, so 34 zones. You have the whole world. And the job is a little different in that you have responsibilities operationally. So I have West Coast responsibilities to make sure we have governors that are trained and properly prepared to step in. Our club presidents are ready to go and run the organization. So operationally, on a day-to-day basis, there's that piece of it. When you sit on the board,
Was Paul Harris Catholic?
I have no idea.
That was mere random.
Because this whole structure is the Catholic Church.
Well, it's 113 years old, and it's very typical of a lot of structures that existed, at that point in time.
There's no Pope.
So,
There's no Pope.
So it's quite possible that there's a lot of what we have that reflects that, but it also reflects the businesses that existed at that time too. So when you get to the board and you sit at the table, there's 17 of you, and we're from all different countries, and there's only 4 from the United States, and you have to take your hat off to say I'm not there representing the West Coast of the United States. Because when you sit at that board, your real job is to figure out what's best for Rotary International and what's best for the entire organization, wherever that is. And that may mean that you have to set aside some feelings about the West Coast of the United States for a little bit. But if you're doing the job right, you're looking at the whole world. So when you go sit at the board, you're really filling a role. There's 17 people that are filling a role to look at the entire Rotary organization. Mine on the West Coast is fairly simple, as I said, because one culture, primarily one language, and it's fairly simple. My counterpart there are 30,000 Rotarians in Africa, so that's one zone. All the countries, all the cultures, all the languages, huge job. His other matched paired zone is Eastern Europe. All the countries, all the languages, all the culture, it's amazing. And how many of you have seen the flag ceremony where they introduce the flags of Rotary at a convention or a major? Not many. Well, every flag from every country, and Rotary's in 200 countries and geographic areas around the world, and every flag comes in. And I was sitting next to Yinka Babalola, who is the director from Africa, and he leans over and says, I think half these 200 flags are mine. And I'm thinking, I've got life pretty simple here in the West Coast compared to what he does in Africa and Eastern Europe. But it's a fun operation, and we get to move quite a bit around the world. Last year was my first year as a director, and I had an opportunity to serve on a number of very interesting and cool committees. And for me, that's good because I love learning. I like finding out how Rotary works. So that worked out well. And we ended up traveling over to Sri Lanka, India, Kuala Lumpur. We were in South Australia, down in Adelaide, had gone through Sydney on the way to Adelaide. And so you find yourself not only through the United States, not only up and down the coast to visit clubs and districts and be with them, but also in other parts of the world. I was commenting earlier that because I was on the board, you're all familiar with the Rose Parade. It happens every year, and Rotary typically has a float. There's 4 or 5 districts down in that Pasadena area that pool money and time and energy together and put this Rotary float on every year. It's a massive effort, and they always have the president of Rotary International ride the float. And as it turned out, a couple years ago, whoever was the president at the time was riding on the float and never had a chance to relieve himself before he got through the whole thing and got stuck for about 4 hours. And so when the next president, Ian Risley, came along, he was saying, well, what's this deal? I got invited to sit on the Rose, on the Rose float. And he says, oh, you don't want to do that, man. You got to be able to not pee for 4 hours. and so Ian said, okay, I decline. And so he sent so he sends this letter back to the Rose Parade group, and they said, I'm not going to go. And so the Rotary team there in LA calls me up and says, John, we want you on the float. And I was saying that you don't want me. I'm an old white guy, and you need young you know, good-looking, attractive people, preferably a woman, and get them, and they don't worry about it. We've got that covered because we have walkers all around the float, and they're all young, pretty good-looking people. And so we're just like a token leader on the, on the float. But I said, okay, so I relented and I got to do it, and it was a thrill. What a treat to be able to do that. And as it turned out, Ian was in the stands. He came to the Rose Parade. He just didn't want to ride the float. and the way they do all the floats is the main parade route goes along that way all the way down. And they line up all the floats perpendicular to that, and then the bands and the marching and are all off on side street. And so as they feed a float in, they feed a band in, feed a marching unit in, and the entire thing is synced and goes all the way up. There were roughly 90 floats at the time we were doing it, and Rotary's float just happened to be 44, and right perpendicular to 44 was this whole street of porta potties. I'm thinking, this isn't hard. You know, we could, right up until the time they kind of keep you, they put a little safety belt around you so you're tied into the float. But they don't start moving until 8. And then from 8 to like 10:30, 11, you really need to be there in the float. But it was a treat and one of those neat opportunities that comes your way because the president says, hey, I need you to be someplace else. So that's background, kind of general idea of you know, how I spend my time where I go, how directors work, the kinds of things we work on. Any thoughts, questions that you have?
What's your term, and how long do you? What's your term as a director?
It's a 2-year
Okay.
assignment, and so I'm serving from July of 17 to June of 19.
Okay.
So I go through there, and in the first year as a director, they take and the 17 don't all roll at once, and so what happens is 9 roll and 8 roll, and so my group of 9 came in, and then this year we were joined by a new 8 that came in, and then our 9 will go off next June, and a new 9 will come in, and so you get to serve with one board that ended and one board that is going forward. In the second year, what happens is the president-elect. Right now, our president is Barry Rassett. When he was a president-elect, has to put a team together, and so he looks at second-year directors, and he has to fill in who's going to be the vice president, who's going to be the chair of the executive committee, who's going to be the treasurer for Rotary International. And I was fortunate enough to have been asked. I jumped at the opportunity. The deal is we all pray for Barry's good health because we want him to be in the role and be able to fulfill it. But operationally, should anything ever happen to the president, then I'm the next one to go on in. So we have continuity that in leadership, and we have a similar thing that comes up with the president-elect and the president nominee.
So, as we all know, the way you become president of a club is you miss a meeting and then they nominate you. How do you become a director? I mean, is there a nomination process, election process?
In all honesty, nothing really happens in Rotary without encouragement. If you think about all the things that you might have done in any job that you've done, somebody encouraged you to do it. Somebody said, you'd be great at that. You would really, and up until that point, it might have been there, but you don't think about it. It kind of puts it off a little bit. But somebody says, you'd be really good, and why don't you think about that? And so that seed is what usually gets a lot of things started for every single job in Rotary. And once you get past and you've served as a club president, you have the opportunity to put your hat in for governor, but you've got to go forward and say you want to do this. And it's the same after you served as governor, then you put your name forward to be considered as director. In all honesty, I didn't want to be a director. And I didn't think this was a job that was appealing. I didn't think, there's parts of it that are kind of less attractive to, and so I would have these conversations. People would say, John, you really ought to think about doing that, and I put it off. And the year I put my name forward, I'd wake up in the morning and Mary Ellen would say, well, how do you feel about it today? And I say, well, you know what? I think I can make a difference. I think this is something I could do, and I knew I could do the job. It was just a matter of that I want to do the job, and I would do that back and forth throughout the summer. And she'd ask me the next day, and I said, nah, I'm not going there. And then the next day, how do you feel about it? Well, today, it's not so bad. And I did that until finally about later on in the summer of that year, and finally got to the point of saying, you know what, this is important work. Rotary is a great organization. It would be a privilege to be able to do this. If I can do this, then why not? So I put my hat in the ring for that, and was selected, and then went forward. One of the questions that comes out from a lot of groups is, how come we can't get more women in leadership within Rotary? Well, if you think about that model that I just described, the only people who can serve as governor are the people who served as club president. So you get all these club presidents, whoever they may be, men, women, and they go forward, and they're the candidate pool, and those that choose can serve as governor. And of all those people who serve as governors, men or women, they create the pool for who works as a director. And of all the people who serve as director, men or women, that's your pool for president. And it's taken us ages to get to the point of having enough women, even though women have been a part of Rotary for 30 years, it's taken us a long time to get enough people through all of those buckets and have the interest in doing something like leading Rotary.
So who in the room thinks we ought to push Lisa forward as district governor?
Yeah,
You'd be great at that.
no. The convention or district conference party room is pretty happening. I can see that.
So Rotary's a very large global organization, has some influence. Is there a lobbyist or some kind of part of Rotary that goes in front of the United Nations to push an agenda?
Great question. And the whole idea of advocacy is huge. If I were to, let me approach the answer to your question by having you reflect on your experience with Polio Plus. What is it you think we're doing most in Polio Plus? If I said raising money, would that be the biggest thing that we've done for polio over 30 years? Would going and doing immunizations be the biggest thing, the biggest effort that we've done? I think that when the book is finally written on polio, the thing they're going to say was the most significant item that Rotary contributed to the entire process was advocacy. Not necessarily advocacy of legislative leaders, but advocacy of citizens like yourselves who went to legislative leaders and made a point. So this is important stuff. We need to support this and make sure it's in the budget. Rotarians have raised, polio from mid-'80s to now, we've spent close to $9 billion. On this. Rotarians have raised about $2 billion of that. Governments of the world have raised the rest. And the reason they got the rest is because of advocates like us who go before people and convince them that we need $200 million from the Canadian government. And then people will break that money loose and bring it out. So advocacy becomes a very important part of our role as Rotarians in the work that we do. Now, do we have lobbyists that apply the Beltway for funds? Not literally.
More grassroots?
It is, Rotary at its heart is organic. In the essence of who we are, it's organic, club level.
You might also mention in answering this question that Rotary was very involved in founding the UN.
Yes, the start of the UN was actually, I think, a half dozen people out of the San Francisco Club actually were part and instrumental of the structure of the UN and how that came together. So Rotarians were intimately involved, and we actually have a person who's a volunteer like us, but a person whose job it is to be the liaison to the United Nations, and we've had that ever since
That's kind of what I
1945.
was meaning, but,
Yeah.
because it seems that having a relationship with the UN would be pretty important for a global.
It is. It is. Part of it, you know, that's just one front. There's other fronts where Rotary's partnership arrangements are so important because pretty much up until 1985, Rotary did everything inside. So from 1905 to like 85, so 80 years of kind of insular stuff. And then when they started to work on polio and partner with World Health, Centers for Disease Control, UNICEF, they started realizing that they could leverage the energy, time, money, and everything that they had by working with people of like minds. And so somebody has got a great idea, and they've got resources, we can leverage what we're doing. So our partnerships then started with that cluster around the polio advocacy. We've done a lot of partnerships, but it's those relationships with other people, other organizations that allow us to take what we're doing and really give it wings, because sometimes we can't do it all. We can't fund it all.
So we have a saying here, it's just not Kiwanis.
Yeah.
Question, when I joined Rotary, I was 33 years old. I became president when I was 38. We were a 100-member club at that point in time. That club is now about what this room is, about 25 people, with nobody younger than 40. It seems like Rotary is having difficulty encouraging young people to join. Is that accurate? What is Rotary at the top level doing to make sure that our organization remains vibrant and relevant?
Yeah. And the answer lies in where you sit. If you're in India, and if I was doing this group, and I was several years ago, and I was talking to a Rotary Club, and I had no idea I was going to be speaking, but we had gone over there, Mercer Island had done a grant to put in some check dams and deliver wheelchairs, and so we had about 20 of us from our club go over to India and sit down and work with the Rotary clubs over there, and they met us at the train station, and it was very exciting, and they said, would you come to our Rotary meeting tomorrow morning? And I said, sure. So all of us came to the Rotary meeting. At the time, I think I was a governor nominee, which is a big thing in India. But when you get there, they have a head table, and the president and the sergeant at arms, and everybody sit up at the head table. And the program is going on, and I lean over to the president and I say, what's the program today? And he leans over and he says, you are. I says, what do you want me to talk about? And he says, Rotary in the United States. And I looked down at this group and nobody was over 35. And my message to them was, everything we're doing in the United States is trying very, very hard to look like you. They were the movers and shakers in Akola, India. They were everybody that were going to do anything. They walked together, they played volleyball together, their families picnicked together, they did everything, and they were the pillars of that community. And they're all young in doing it. So the answer to the question is, where are you in the world? Because Rotary's not having any trouble getting younger people and pulling in folks, and is energized and it's alive and well. If you go to Australia, the average age is 73. And if they can't figure it out, they'll be dead in 5 years. Life expectancy is, and so that's the reality. If you come to the United States, we're a little bit in between. What we've lost in North America, it's not just U.S., but if you just take this whole part of the world, what we've lost is that idea that we come together to grow Rotary. we've gotten this idea in our heads that, oh, we just come together and have a good time, fellowship, and we'll do some service. And behind it all, though, our ability to do good in the world is limited by two things: the number of people you got working the problem and the resources you got available. If you can increase either one of those, you increase our ability as an organization to do good in the world.
I think that's in general. I think the first part of your statement was coming together is a big thing about it. If you remember, there's a lack of that where people don't come together as much to want to do service organizations. Because when I started Rotary Tens Club 12 years ago, I was doing this and the Eagles and the Moose all at the same time. And both those other two organizations slowly went down, but have slowly been on the rise. The club I know, and the Moose Club in North Bend, has gotten a little bit younger from where it was, no offense, the old white guys club. But it's still, it's a lot of service organizations are just having that whole problem with people wanting to get out to do something, to realize they get to help each other and what it's for.
Yeah, I'd elaborate, because we've seen our club kind of go up and down. We were pretty small 14, 15 years ago. We got bigger here a few years ago, but I don't think we were as effective a few years ago. I think we had a lot of Rotarians that just, we might have had numbers, but the amount of work we were able to do within the communities, the local side, was probably limited. I think we're more effective at a smaller, more robust working group, because I think everybody pulls their weight a little bit more.
Well, I don't want to be doom and gloom, but there's an adage in business, whatever business you're in, that says if you're not growing, you're dying. So you can tell yourself all day long that you really love where you're at right now, and it works for you. And I will tell you that in 10 years you won't be here, unless you accept the idea that if you're not growing, you're dying. And so it's the same for Rotary clubs. You either are growing or not. And if you're not, you're going to drop off. Let me give you the hard number on it. I mentioned I had 1,300 clubs on the West Coast. Before taking the job, I wanted to understand what the issue was with membership and where we stood on it. And I said, so give me the membership data, and I crunched it and went back over 10 years for all 1,300 clubs. And I thought, this, we're not growing enough. Our clubs aren't growing, and I went back and analyzed it, but I was wrong. Our clubs, on average, were growing 2.6 people per year for 10 years. Every single club, not literally not every single club, because some didn't grow, but on average, that's what it showed. And then on average, when I then looked at, well, how many are we losing? We're losing 3.4. So every club per year is losing 0.8 of a person. So a club that was 32 10 years ago is 24 now. And if you look around our districts, it's exactly the same way. 10 years ago, we were 3,200 people. Today, we're 2,400. It's like paper cuts. We look at ourselves and say, well, we only lost one person. It's not so bad. But we do that for 10 years, and it's like, how many have we lost? And we keep doing this to ourselves. And this is happening all over North America. And until we get the idea in our heads that if you're not growing, you're dying, you're missing this message.
It seems to me we're not getting the young people. So how do we attract young people or make our organization?
One of the things we did in 2016 at the Council on Legislation was to pass something called flexibility in Rotary clubs. So to create an opportunity for clubs to figure out what works best for you. I went to my club yesterday at Mercer Island, and I'm sitting with the president, and he says, our board's talking that we'll meet traditionally, like this, 3 times a month, and one that we're thinking about going just for, same place, we'll just come in the evening, though, and do wine and cheese and just social, but I'll make it accessible for other people who can't make the Tuesday noon time. Well, when you get a lot of younger folks and see where their schedules are and what they're committed to, first off, demographically, Gens X and Y don't line up to organizational structure quite like previous generations did. So you gotta acknowledge that and realize that the approach to them has to be different. They need to see flexibility. They need to see that there's a lot of ways that they can do business with Rotary. there's this thought of how do you consume Rotary? If this thing called Rotary is a product, how do you consume it? Well, a lot of us consume it this way, at a traditional meeting. We come on in, we do certain things, go through it. Other clubs are starting to look at different ways to make that experience accessible to other people. And one of the things our board is looking at is something called the global membership model. This is under test. We haven't figured it out yet. We're not even close to bringing it out of the closet. But essentially, if you think in your head of Amazon, and the first time you order anything from Amazon, they got you. They got your credit card, they got your name, they got your information, they got all the stuff on you, and they got a hold of you. And they don't let go. And they tell you by email that people that have ordered the product that you just ordered also have been purchasing this, this, and this. And there's that connection and development of that connection. Rotary isn't in a position to do that right now. But we have people every single day. I can guarantee you that this morning people are writing checks into the 501c3s on the East Coast to help offset the impact of Florence. Right now, they're not even Rotarians. How do we keep that connection connected with them? So what the global membership model is trying to do is look for ways that we can share Rotary with more people in more different ways than we have traditionally done it. Now, there's going to be a lot of longer serving people that look at it and say, well, that's not a Rotarian. Yeah, you're not really coming to the meeting, you're not doing the stuff that we're doing, so it doesn't count. Well, maybe for another generation it does count. And maybe that's where they put their toe in the water. And then maybe they do that for a bit and then eventually move to this kind of an experience, but you don't necessarily start there. And so what we're trying to think about is if we're going to be transformational, if we're going to reach a broader group, if we're going to regenerate ourselves, especially in North America, how do you do that? And that's what we're thinking about.
Have you done any
Just for,
analytics?
Steve, hold on just a second. Just for everybody's time, I want John to continue if he can, but just note in respect for everybody's time, it is 8:15. So if you've got to go, I don't want you late for whatever pace you.
Just a quick question on there. Have you done any analytics within Rotary on morning, lunch, evening meetings and growth in each of those groups and which in age groups and you know?
Growth absolutely is on the evening after work.
That's what I'm kind of wondering with the young folks. You know, morning, 7 o'clock in the morning is probably not their favorite one, I would assume. But
no.
And then probably lunch. They're
Lunch
busy
is
working.
least because it's a huge commitment in terms of commute to wherever you're going to meet,
So
do the
evening
meeting, and
meeting.
then back out. So it's the hardest one of the group to do it. When businesses were funding membership and having you there as a representative of that business, then it was a no-brainer.
Right.
Just go, take the time, and do it. But that's less and less the case.
That's why we're trying to mix it up a little bit with evening stuff and morning stuff.
No, I understand. Thank you for coming. Appreciate that.
Any other questions for John?
What was your position at Costco?
I was senior VP of HR and risk management. So it was fun. It was absolutely the best job in the company because I had people, I had labor relations, employee development, I had all the health benefits, retirement plans, had all of the workers' comp, general liability, insurance programs. I ran a captive, safety loss control, and so every day I could kind of put my arm in the water on whatever I wanted to kind of play with, and it was fun seeing the synergies that happen between those different silos.
Thank you.
Thanks.
John, thank you very much. All right. Anything else that we didn't talk about today?
Just one thing, and
Yes,
I
sir.
think it's kind of a good follow-up to what John was saying and what you guys are saying about, you know, how do you get younger people, and part of it is doing business and foreseeing, you know, business opportunities for those that have jobs that would be applicable to that. So we have started last year the Puget Sound Rotary Network. And I will leave a bunch of these cards for you guys here this morning. But if you have a business, please, it's free as a Rotarian to register. And if you need a service, I encourage you to jump on this and see our fellow Rotarians in the Puget Sound area. We've got businesses ranging from real estate to finance to getting your house painted. So I would encourage you to look at this, and I'll leave these cards for you.